It's Latin for many.
Tick.
They'll suck your blood. They'll suck
Politics.
your blood.
Sorry about that. It was a little janky on the jingles there. Not very smooth. But yeah, let's learn about this historic climate bill that just passed.
Oh, yes. I love it when they call it that. That's awesome.
I mean, they had all kinds of names for this bill here, but this is Politico. There's a bunch of outlets. I picked Politico because it was Politico. The headline here, Historic Climate Bill to Supercharge Clean Energy Industry. Woo!
Sure.
Yeah, it's happening. Finally, it's happening. Senate Democrats delivered a dramatic win for President Joe Biden's effort to fight climate change on Sunday, passing a bill that will devote hundreds of billions of dollars to clean energy sources and speed the U.S. transition away from fossil fuels. The Inflation Reduction Act.
Hey, what does that have to do with climate change?
Why did they call it Inflation Reduction Act?
I have an answer for that.
I know, but it's just hilarious.
Yeah.
Which had appeared to be dead just weeks ago and now heads to the House of Representatives, would accelerate U.S. emission cuts and put the country on a path to reduce greenhouse gases by 40% below 2005 levels by 2030, significantly narrowing the gap with the goal Biden set under the Paris Climate Agreement to cut that pollution by at least half by that date. The bill that includes $369 billion in climate and energy provisions that will transform how America gets their energy and shape the country's climate and industrial policy for decades. And it represents an extraordinary turnaround from just months ago when the Biden administration pivoted from its climate priorities to press for increased oil and gas production to combat the energy crisis that sent energy prices skyrocketing. That's why. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer teed up the final vote, calling the legislation, quote, the boldest climate package in U.S. history. It will kickstart the era of affordable clean energy in America. It's a game changer. It's a turning point, and it's been a long time coming, he said. The climate portions of the bill were far lower than the $550 billion originally envisioned as part of a broader $2.2 trillion bill a year ago, but they still represent the biggest investment in clean energy sources in U.S. history, about 4 times as large as the incentives contained in President Barack Obama's American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009.
And there's the key. Incentives.
That's right. It's all about
when
incentives.
you hear what it's actually doing, it's just incentives. And it's not just incentives for the earth.
Yeah, no, it's probably it's least about the earth when it comes to the incentives. The drop was due to inflation concerns from West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who only acquiesced to the bill after private negotiations with Schumer last month and the assurances from leading economists like former Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers that it would not worsen the economic pain for Americans. Just a promise from an economist convinces Joe Manchin. And Manchin won the addition of language that linked measures to help boost oil and gas production to some of the clean energy incentives, irking environmental activists, but not enough for them to pull their support for the bill. The House of Representatives is expected to take up the bill later this week. Its climate measures include billions of dollars to expand wind and solar power production, bring electric vehicles closer to the financial reach of more Americans, and make $1.5 billion available to oil companies, cut down their greenhouse gas emissions and penalize them for failing to do so. Well, okay. That's interesting. And it would help develop technologies such as carbon capture and sequestration, hydrogen, and small nuclear reactors that experts say will be needed to get the U.S. to net zero emissions by 2050, a level scientists say is necessary to prevent catastrophic climate change. It would devote $4 billion to help address an imminent disaster for the Southwest as climate-fueled drought threatens power and water supplies for 40 million Americans along the Colorado River. It goes on and on here. We can point out some other things here about the Clean Power Association and things of that nature.
I think we get the point. All this clean energy aid and stuff is coming in the form of rebates for cars. So it's really, rebates for people buying electric cars is where the bulk of the money going to save the planet actually comes from. And lo and behold, it also just happens to benefit big American corporations. Wow. Yeah. Funny how that can work.
Here's a name that we haven't heard in a while. John Podesta, founder of the Liberal Center for American Progress and who served in both the Obama and Clinton administrations, said in a text, the bill will set off, quote, a tsunami of investment, American job creation and innovation that will, if history is any judge, likely result in even greater emission reductions than the modeling shows. Oh, yeah. Good. John Podesta, the guy that was a creepy man during the whole Pizzagate thing.
Mm-hmm.
Out again.
He's got the Podesta emails.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's hilarious. And the name of the inflation bill, there's nothing in there that actually does inflation reduction. I mean, on its face, but it's
what are you talking about? Why would they call it that if it's not has nothing to do with inflation?
Because Joe Manchin wasn't going to let it happen unless he could tell his people that he voted to reduce inflation. I mean, that's what it comes down to. Yeah. Joe Manchin, you know, he's what is it? South Virginia, one of the Virginias, where it's all coal, it's all oil. Those are his people. He's a Democrat, but he's, you know, an actual working man's Democrat. He's a pain in the butt to all the corporate Democrats, and he holds things up. He's a troublemaker. And to get this thing passed, he went in, had some negotiations, got a bunch of money for the oil companies, got a bunch of money for, a lot of the traditional energy sectors. You know, there's a lot of lobbying involved here. Kristen Sinema went in. She's sort of the female counterpart to Manchin. She's from Arizona. She got a whole bunch of private equity, Wall Street firms, a bunch of money through this thing. It's filled with pork, but the Democrats needed something. They needed something to let voters know that they're not just the worst ever when midterms come around. So they really made a lot of concessions to get Sinema and Manchin on board, aka again supporting big evil corporations across the board, including Wall Street, including the oil companies, including everybody. But they changed the name to the Inflation Reduction Act. It was not called that. And that's why you hear all this. It's all strictly being promoted as climate change. Mm-hmm. But there's a part of it, Gons. There's a part of it that's not getting as much attention, except for notorious, currently anti-government Jeff Bezos and his outlet, the Washington Post. So we can be grateful that Bezos is at war with Biden right now.
Thank you, Bezos. Yes, just take
Thanks,
all
Daddy
of our
Bezos.
mapping of our houses, Bezos. If you'll fight the Democrats.
Well, it's useful for the billionaires and the government to be at war because that allowed for this article at the Washington Post. Democrats' $80 billion wager. A bigger IRS will be a better IRS.
Oh, great. Yay. Yay. Better IRS is what we need.
And this part really has the most to do with inflation, I think, but in the worst possible way. Yeah. A newly empowered, that's the thing with inflation. Is once it happens, the only way to fix it in the eyes of the elites is to hurt the working man. There's no way out of inflation that doesn't directly punish the working man.
We talked about the Hegelian dialectic, but they print all this money for a couple of years, more than they've ever printed. Yep. They give it to the corporations. They give a little bit to the people, sprinkle it to the people, with the stimulus bill and stuff. But all these. Yeah, and then all these corporations have the money. They make all this money, and then the government's like, "Oh, the inflation is out of control," and then we have to tax them. But
and the taxpayer pays for it.
Yeah, and the taxpayer pays for it.
The middle class is sort of the bank account for the government. Yeah, they give all their money to the corporations, and then the middle class has to pay for it. And this is one way that they do it. A newly empowered Internal Revenue Service is one of the keys to the sweeping climate, healthcare, and tax bill. Senate Democrats hope to pass this week. This was before
a couple days ago, yeah.
Yeah, with billions of dollars and new funds for the agency so it can collect money for the federal government by going after higher income tax cheats. Oh, higher income tax cheats. The bill, known as the Inflation Reduction Act, would put $80 billion towards beefing up the IRS in line with $80
billion?
In line with liberals' long-term goals to strengthen tax collection of enforcement on corporations and high-income earners. This is where they
Amazon
get you.
And Bezos.
This is where they get you, man. While relieving low-income taxpayers of cumbersome and frightening audits.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks.
Right. Yeah, right, bro.
Yeah.
Some of the additional revenue would go to pay for the largest ever U.S. investment in clean energy and technology. That's those rebates. The idea is that the government could bring in more money by examining when have they ever needed to bring in more money? Bringing in more money didn't stop them when they printed trillions of dollars. And this is where the big sort of nonsense comes in, is that, if we don't tax them more, we won't have money. You just print the money, and here's where it comes from here's why the beefing up the IRS actually, is a inflationary reducing thing, is that it takes more money out of the system. They take as much money as possible from the middle class, so people have less money, and that in theory brings inflation down.
One can argue that the government is laundering money through the middle class. They printed
That's
it
exactly
all, maybe illegally, well, not illegally, but just unethically. And then, they got to legitimize all that. So, we're going to tax everybody and, make that all those dollars legit for the government. So,
That's exactly right. It really is a money laundering scheme.
Yeah.
But, it's a very powerful fear mechanism as well. The idea is that the government could bring in more money by examining corporate and high income tax returns. Oh, that's weird, because in the Inflationary Reduction Bill included a whole bunch of corporate and high income tax cuts. Weird. Why would you cut their taxes and then, get the number is 87,000 new auditors are going to be working for the.
Well, why don't they invest that money into robots and AI? I thought that's the direction we're going here. Is this just so the government can say, we've created jobs. Look at all these jobs we've created. Yeah.
The idea is that the government could bring in more money by examining corporate and high-income tax returns than it does by pursuing lower and middle-income taxpayers who make mistakes on their returns and underpay their taxes by small amounts. Look at this. This is disgusting what they're writing here. It is ludicrous. The IRS in recent years has grown more dependent on those types of audits because they are relatively inexpensive. They're automated, and they preserve the agency's limited personnel resources. So that's what they're saying. We've been auditing the middle class because, it's cheaper for us to do it. And what they're saying is, the middle class doesn't have money to fight an audit. You try to audit a corporation, they have teams of lawyers that will keep the IRS wrapped up in court for decades, so they don't have to pay the money. It's cheaper, more efficient to take from the middle class as the IRS. But they also mostly fall on taxpayers who can't afford to fight back by spending hours on the phone with tax agency or hiring lawyers. The result is that the IRS's prolific enforcement capabilities, which bring in on average better than $10 in revenue for every $1 spent pursuing audits, are often trained on the most economically vulnerable taxpayers. More than half of the agency's audits from 2021 were directed at taxpayers with incomes less than $75,000. Half of all audits are on people with less than $75,000 a year, according to IRS data. More than 4 in 10 of its audits targeted recipients of the Earned Income Tax Credit, one of the country's main anti-poverty measures. So people who are getting anti-poverty tax credits are being targeted by IRS audits. More than half of the IRS's exams in 2021 were of taxpayers with, this is a graph they're showing here. Yeah, so you've got $0 to $75,000 a year is 51% of the audits. Then 75 through 200K is 26, so that's a fourth. And then it's split up between 11%, 7%, and 4% of the higher brackets. Congress and the White House, when led by Republicans, have starved the IRS of resources for so long, experts say, that even with an influx of $80 billion in new funding, the agency's ability to transform itself is far from assured. Then it goes on to some
I think this is interesting right numbers here in the context of what we're talking about, because it says here some of its main computers, this is IRS, still run on programming language that dates to the 1960s called COBOL, which we've talked about before. The IRS has repeatedly told policymakers the program is so old that college computer science courses rarely teach it anymore, forcing the IRS to spend heavily on training new hires in antiquated systems. In fact, I remember when they were trying to look for people that knew this language, like people that were in college in like the 70s and 80s, who still know how to program in COBOL to, help the IRS out. And I think that maybe part of this redoing here has a crypto element to it. And I'm talking about CBDCs. I don't think we can stop CBDCs from coming to America or the world, really. And the backbone of CBDCs is going to have to be some kind of crypto asset, some digital asset, which is why I think it's very interesting that in recent weeks here, days, we heard BlackRock partnering with Coinbase. Why? I don't know. BlackRock, the hedge fund that lost $1 trillion in the first 2 quarters of 2022. Somehow they're fine. They're just keep chugging along. Partner with Coinbase so they can start selling Bitcoin to these high money people. And in the bill that we just talked about, the climate bill or the inflation stopping bill or whatever it's called, there's an incentive in there, $1.5 billion. We read about it for oil and gas companies to cut emissions.
Right.
And the talk of a lot of Bitcoin maximalists have been that once these oil and energy type of places are forced, which they incentivized, I'm sorry, not forced, incentivized to move in a more clean energy direction, they will take that energy and mine Bitcoin with it. And I actually think that's part of the plan here. Why would BlackRock get it? Line up with Coinbase, start making Bitcoin available to their customers, unless the U.S. government and the infrastructure of the United States will, with clean energy, with the full backing of the government, start mining Bitcoin. I think that's what they're planning to do.
I totally think crypto is a huge part of it. I mean, you've had 2 years where individuals were able to make a nice chunk of money on crypto if they played their cards right. And then all the crash and the nonsense going on now, they're the perfect people to target with the IRS. Now, that was the Washington Post, liberal bastion of elitism. Now you head on over to, I stuck a link there called an Audible, stuck a link there in our document there, Gons. And this is New York Post. And this one came out a couple days ago. The Inflation Reduction Act would double IRS agents and audits, but the super rich aren't the real targets. The Manchin-Schumer Inflation Reduction Act which could clear the Senate this weekend, is supposed to raise tens of billions of dollars by adding $80 billion to the IRS budget and hiring as many as 80,000 more auditors and agents. The plan is estimated to double the number of Americans audited each year. To quote the church lady from Saturday Night Live, well, isn't that special?
We had that ISO at some point.
What's that?
We had that ISO at some point in the show.
Oh, yeah. Most of the money raised from these audits won't come from the super rich or multi-billion-dollar corporations, both well-stocked with accountants and tax attorneys to fight IRS allegations. Small business owners and upper-middle income workers will likely be the targets. The woman who runs an accounting firm or a restaurant won't have the resources to fight the government in tax court. This proposal comes just a year after the IRS's latest scandal with agents illegally leaking millionaires' and billionaires' private tax return data to the media. Conservatives should be especially worried. Will the Biden administration weaponize these tens of thousands of new agents against them, as it's done in the Justice Department and FBI? Remember, there's the Trump FBI directors who got targeted.
Right.
And before that, there's a bunch of faith organizations that got targeted. No one should forget this is precisely what happened in the Obama era. Obama-era Lewis Lerner affair. The agency cherry-picked for extra scrutiny the tax returns of conservative organizations and donors who happen to oppose President Barack Obama's policies. We all want Americans to pay the taxes they owe, but this plan is a brutal way of making that happen. The bill will also be counterproductive. It would add new green energy tax write-offs and other loopholes to a true 30,000-page tax code. All this enforcement activity won't raise, and then it goes on, it's kind of conservative take on the thing. But the point of the matter is, the amount of corporations and uber rich that they're talking about taxing, you do not need 80,000 people to tax the corporations. Okay, you could tax the corporations with who you have now and, sure, maybe get some more guys on the team or whatever. But if you're adding 80,000 new auditors and agents, you don't need 80,000 people to tax the corporations. You need 80,000 more people to focus on auditing millions of other, middle income Americans. And, it's just continuing the war on the middle class. And so it is disturbing. It is a classic move to hide the destruction of the middle class behind the veneer of climate change. That's why all the biggest outlets are reporting on the climate change bill. They're calling it the climate change bill, even though it's Inflation Reduction Act. It's really sick what they're doing.
It is meant to completely choke out middle class and lower class businesses and individuals, because if the compliance element of the climate stuff, the ESG stuff that's behind all this, certain companies, certain mom pop shops and stuff, they may not be able to comply. They may not have the resources or the finances or even the ability to be compliant with some kind of emissions, metric that they're going to impose upon everybody. And so those places, they'll go out of business, they'll die. And so this really is a corporate takeover.
Exactly. It helps the corporations take over all the smaller businesses.
And
now
people are going to be up in arms about this. There may be a war, Basil. There may be some blood on the streets, literally. How are the IRS going to protect themselves?
Well, they're going to do it on Twitter with blue checkmark Twitter. Okay. Do you have a punchline to this setup?
I do. PJmedia.com. Why does the IRS need 5 million rounds of ammo?
Oh, right. I forgot about that.
It says here, Representative Matt Gaetz has introduced a bill to keep the Internal Revenue Service from buying ammunition. Reps Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jeff Duncan, and Paul Gosar are on board as well, which means probably won't go anywhere the way things are going. The IRS is buying bullets. Yes, they've amassed roughly 5 million rounds of ammo. Gee, what for? Gates's Disarm the IRS bill would put a stop to the tax collectors building their arsenal, which, according to a report from the Government Accountability Office, includes but is not limited to 2,148 law enforcement officers, 4,461 weapons, including 15 fully automatic weapons. Of course, this is a PJ Media, so it says, for you lefties, that's a machine gun.
Yeah, the IRS is, they're getting ready, man.
That's what I'm saying. They know
these IRS guys are going beast mode. They're getting some actual machine guns put in the budget there.
Well, it's funny because it's like, well, we couldn't take away their guns, so we're just going to have to fight fire with fire.
We need more guns.
We need to load up. We need to load up on our weapons.
Chainsaw their house down.
I mean, this is kind of scary when you connect the dots here. It's I don't know what they're planning, but I think they know that there's going to be an uprising of people very upset at the IRS in particular for.
Well, and they're not the only
down.
ones. There's been some very interesting analysis of a lot of the administrative agencies in the government who have budgets for guns and ammunition and law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
I forget who, I think it may have been a Gates thing too recently, where like the education board had a bunch of money for guns, the agriculture, the agriculture, association or whatever. I forget what it's called.
Yeah,
had a bunch of money for guns, like all these little administrative organizations are adding budgets for weapons into their yearly budgets, or they've had them for a while, either way. We've finally started having people question, like, wait a second, why does the agricultural department need AR-15s? Why does the IRS need 15 fully automatic weapons and 5 million rounds of ammo? It's pretty intense, man.
It's gonna get crazy. I don't like where this is headed.
80,000 IRS agents.
Are they all gonna be trained to handle a weapon?
Yeah, they're commandos, man. Because all of our troops
audit you and shoot you.
All of our troops are gonna get sent over to Taiwan and Ukraine.
Oh yeah, the American people are going to be
somebody
completely
to keep the peace at home.
Yeah,
the IRS squad.
IRS squad. Oh man, we should put in our application. We'll be first in line to join the IRS.
Should we become IRS agents?
I think that's an exit strategy potentially. We can be double agents.
Potential exit strategy.
Yeah.